It was a Tuesday in late October, and I'd only stopped at the Rido Centre because I needed new boot insoles before the real cold hit. I wasn't planning to run into anyone. I wasn't planning anything at all. I was 63 years old, retired from 28 years of nursing at the Ottawa General, and my biggest concern that afternoon was whether the lineup at the pharmacy would eat into my parking time. That's when I saw her. My daughter was standing near the food court by one of those round tables nobody ever actually sits at for long. She had her back half turned to me and she was holding her wallet open, tilting coins from one palm to the other, counting them slowly. The way you count when you're not sure there's enough. I stood still for a moment, just watching, because something in my chest told me to look before I spoke. She was wearing her work scrubs. She's a dental hygienist at a clinic over on Bank Street, but the shift would have ended hours ago. Her hair was pulled back, but pieces had come loose. She looked tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix, and she was counting coins in the food court of a shopping mall, like she was trying to decide if she could afford a sandwich. My daughter is 34 years old. Lena, I said. She turned around so fast she almost dropped the coins, and the look on her face, just for 1 second before she caught herself, was pure panic, like I'd caught her doing something wrong. Mum. She smiled. The kind of smile that costs something. What are you doing here, getting insoles? What are you doing here? I looked at her hands, the coins still sitting in her palm. Where's your car? She closed her fingers around the coins. It's at home. You took the bus from Bank Street to the Rido Centre? I needed a few things. Lena, I said her name again, quieter this time. Where's your car? She looked away. Toward the food court signs, the Tim Hortons line up, anywhere but my face. And then she said very carefully, Nolan's been using it. Nolan is her husband. For how long? A while. How long is a while? She didn't answer. She was still looking at the Tim Hortons sign, and I watched her jaw tighten, and I knew right then that this was going to be worse than I thought. I took her by the elbow and steered her to a table. I sat her down the way I used to when she was small and had scraped her knee, the same firm gentle that means we're not moving until this is handled. I put my bag on the floor. I looked at her. Start at the beginning, I said. Don't skip anything. Lena and Nolan had been married for 4 years. I had never loved the match, but I'd kept that to myself because she was happy, or she seemed happy, and because my own mother had warned me about the man I married, and I hadn't listened, and I swore I would never push my daughter away the way that pushed me. So I smiled at Christmas dinner. I asked Nolan about his work at the commercial property management company he ran with his mother Pauline. I brought Saskatoon berry pie to their house on holidays because it was his favourite. I tried, but I noticed things. I noticed that when I called Lena's cell, she often didn't pick up and would text back later, busy, call you tomorrow, and tomorrow would come and go. I noticed that when they came for Sunday dinners, Nolan answered most of the questions I asked her. I noticed that she stopped talking about her friends, the ones she'd had since nursing college, the ones who used to call the house looking for her when they were in their 20s. I told myself it was just marriage, just the way people settle into their lives and drift a little. I told myself I was being the kind of mother-in-law I promised I'd never be. I was wrong to tell myself that. Here is what she told me at the food court table while I held her hand and didn't interrupt. It had started small, the way she said these things always do. Nolan had suggested, about a year into the marriage, that it made more sense for him to manage their finances together. He had the head for it, he said. He ran a business. She was working full-time at the clinic. They had the mortgage on the house in Barhaven, and it would be simpler, he said, if everything flowed through one account. She'd have an allowance. His word, she said, though he didn't call it that at first, and all the bills would be taken care of. She went along with it. She thought it was practical. Within 6 months, her paychecks were being deposited into a joint account she couldn't access online because, Nolan said, the online banking had locked up and he hadn't gotten around to calling the bank. The allowance was $200 a week. Out of that, she bought her own lunch, her own toiletries, gifts for her nephew's birthday, anything she needed for herself. If she spent too much one week, he would take it from the next. $200, I said. He said I didn't need more, that everything else was covered. Your paycheck is about $4,000 a month after taxes. She said it flat, factual, like she'd made peace with the number by saying it out loud enough times. The car had been next. The Subaru Outback, the one I'd helped her with the down payment on when she finished her hygienist program, $22,000, and I'd been happy to do it. Nolan had started borrowing it when his truck needed repairs. That had been 4 months ago. The truck had been repaired, or so he said, but somehow the Subaru was still the one he drove to work each morning, and Lena was taking the OC Transpo to Bank Street and back. Did you ask for it back? Yes. What did he say? She looked at the table. He said I didn't need it, that the clinic was easy enough by bus, and that he needed it for client visits. He said I was being difficult. What did Pauline say? She pressed her lips together. Pauline told me that a wife who makes things harder for her husband's business isn't much of a partner. I breathed very steadily through my nose. I had been a nurse for 28 years. I had sat with families in the worst moments of their lives, and I had learned to keep my face quiet when everything inside me was not. Is there more? I asked. She nodded. The house. They'd bought it together 4 years ago. A semi-detached on a quiet crescent in Barhaven, both names on the mortgage, both names on the title. Or so Lena had believed. 8 months ago, Nolan had told her there'd been some paperwork mix-up with the original conveyancing and that a lawyer, his mother's lawyer, had sorted it out. And the title was now in his name only for tax purposes, and it was all above board, don't worry. She'd been worried. She'd asked to see the documents. He told her she was paranoid. He told her this is what happened when women didn't understand how property law worked. He told her she was lucky he handled these things so she didn't have to. Did you ever see the documents? No. Lena. My voice came out very level. Why didn't you call me? And here is where she cried. Not loudly, she'd learned, I think, not to make noise with her crying, but steadily, with her hand pressed flat against her mouth. He said if I talked to anyone, to you, to anyone, he would make sure I lost everything. The house, the marriage, and that if it went to court, you'd see what kind of person I really was. What kind of person you really are. He said he had things, evidence, that I'd been unstable. He'd been keeping notes, on me, things I'd said when I was upset, times I'd been sick and called in to work. He said his mother would testify, that her lawyer would make sure. I sat with that for a long moment. Then I paid for 2 coffees, and I told my daughter to come home with me. I want to be honest about what the next few days looked like, because it was not a movie. I did not have a plan. I was a 63-year-old retired nurse from Oshawa who had been good at her job and good at keeping her house and moderately good at not interfering in her daughter's marriage, and I was scared. I lay awake the first night listening to Lena sleep in her old room down the hall. She still had her old quilt on that bed, the purple one with the white stars she'd had since she was 12, and I tried to think clearly. What I knew, my daughter had been financially controlled for at least 3 years. Her paychecks had been functionally stolen. Her car, a car I had helped purchase, had been taken. Her name may have been fraudulently removed from a property title, and her husband had spent time constructing a case to use against her if she ever tried to leave. What I had, a daughter who was still alive, still employed, currently safe in my house on Viewmount Drive, a good head. And 40 years of knowing how to navigate a system when someone you loved was at risk. The next morning, I called a woman I'd worked alongside for 15 years in the surgical ward. whose younger sister had gone through a difficult separation and had come out the other side. She gave me a name, a family law in Centretown, a woman named Ms. Park, who specialised in exactly this kind of case. I called Ms. Park's office that same afternoon. Ms. Park. Park was small and precise, and she had the kind of stillness that I recognised from the best doctors I'd ever worked under, the ones who didn't move a lot because they didn't need to. She listened to everything I told her, and then she asked Lena to tell her the same things in Lena's own words, and she wrote things down in a narrow notebook and didn't interrupt. When Lena finished, Ms. Park set her pen down and looked at us. "I want to be clear about a few things," she said. "First, what you're describing, the financial control, the restricted access to joint funds, the coerced transfer of property. These are not just civil matters. Depending on what we find, some of this may constitute fraud, possibly criminal fraud." Lena went very still beside me. "Second, you are not without options, but we need documentation. We need to understand what actually happened to that property title. And we need to do this carefully because it sounds like your husband and his mother are prepared to be adversarial." "They'll say she was unstable," I said. "He's been building a file." "Husbands like this usually have," said Miss Park, and she said it with no particular emotion, just the flatness of someone who had heard this exact sentence many times before. "It doesn't hold up the way they think it does. We'll build a better one." The following 2 weeks were the most methodical I had been since my years in nursing, when methodology was what kept people alive. Lena, on misquote, Park's instruction, went to a bank branch in person, alone, not with Nolan, and spoke to the branch manager about her own account access. This was her right. The branch manager, to his credit, was thorough. What he found was this: Lena's direct deposit had, 2 years ago, been redirected from a joint checking account to a second account, a personal account in Nolan's name only. Her paycheques had been going directly to him. Lena had never signed that redirect form. The signature on file was not hers. The branch manager was very quiet after he showed us this. Then he said he needed to speak to the fraud department. While that process began, Miss Park ordered a title search on the Barhaven property. What came back confirmed what we feared. The title had been transferred into Nolan's name alone, using a power of attorney Lena had allegedly signed. Lena had never signed a power of attorney. She'd never been presented with one. The notarization date on the document was from a day Lena had been at work. She had her clinic schedule going back 18 months, precise to the quarter hour. The Subaru was registered in Lena's name. It had never been transferred. Nolan was driving a vehicle that was not his. Ms. Park called me on a Wednesday evening and said, very calmly, "We have more than I expected. I need you to make sure your daughter is somewhere he cannot get to her this week, and I need you to stop any direct communication between her and him and his mother until I say otherwise." I told her Lena was in her childhood bedroom under a purple quilt and was not going anywhere. Nolan had been calling Lena's phone since the day she came home with me. I'd advised her not to answer, and she didn't, but she showed me the messages, and I read them so that she didn't have to carry the weight of them alone. They started controlled. "Come home, we need to talk. This is ridiculous." Then they escalated. "I know you're at your mother's. You're making this worse." Then Pauline began messaging too, long messages about how Lena was damaging her family, about ingratitude, about the sacrifices Nolan had made. Then came the message I had been waiting for. "I've spoken to my lawyer. You need to understand what you're about to lose." I screenshot all of it. Ms. Park used all of it. The meeting happened on a Friday in a conference room at Ms. Park's office on Elgin Street. Nolan came with Pauline and their lawyer, a man named Mr. Beese Talbot, who had the look of someone used to winning by making the other side feel small. I sat beside my daughter, and I did not look small. Ms. Park laid out what we had: the fraudulent account redirect, the forged power of attorney, the title transfer, the vehicle. She laid it out the way I used to lay out a care plan, methodically, item by item, no drama, just facts. Each item landed in that room like a door closing. Mr. Talbot began to say something about Lena's mental health history. Miss Talbot began to say something about Lena's mental health history. Park interrupted him once, politely, and told him that if he raised that line of argument, she would be filing the fraud documentation with the Ottawa Police Service that same afternoon, rather than offering the civil resolution they were currently proposing. She said it the way you say something that is simply true and requires no emphasis. Mr. Talbot stopped talking about Lena's mental health history. What was agreed after 2 hours, 2 hours in which I drank 3 cups of terrible conference room coffee and held my daughter's hand under the table, was this: the property title would be corrected and returned to joint ownership, with Lena having first right of purchase if either party wished to sell. 4 years of diverted paycheques would be repaid, calculated precisely from the bank's own records, as a lump sum deposited to Lena's personal account within 30 days. The Subaru Outback was already in Lena's name, and Nolan would return it with a full tank within 48 hours. Nolan and Pauline would make no contact with Lena outside of communications arranged through legal counsel. And should any further fraud be identified, the bank's fraud investigation was still ongoing. Miss Park reserved the right to escalate to criminal charges. The fraud investigation, 3 months later, did identify further irregularities. Nolan was charged. So was Pauline, as a knowing party to the title transfer. I will not pretend I felt nothing when Miss Park called to tell me. I'm 63 years old, and I have held people's hands while they died, and I have tried my whole life to be measured. But I sat down at my kitchen table, and I put my face in my hands, and I cried a little, and then I made myself a cup of tea, and I was fine. Lena is living with me for now, while the legal proceedings continue and she decides what she wants the next part of her life to look like. She has her car back. She has her money back. The 30 days came and went, and the transfer arrived, and I watched her face when she checked her account balance and saw a number she hadn't seen in years. She's been to dinner twice with the friends she'd lost touch with. One of them, a woman she'd known since their first year at Algonquin, cried when she saw her. There are hard days. I won't pretend otherwise. She is working through things with a counsellor who is very good on Carling Avenue, and she has days where the weight of it, the years of it, catches up with her, and she goes quiet in a way that worries me. But she also laughs sometimes at the dinner table. Real laughs. She laughed last Tuesday at something a patient had said to her at the clinic, and the laugh ran all the way up to her eyes, and I had to look at my plate for a moment because I hadn't seen that in so long that it surprised me. We were sitting at that same table a few weeks ago, just the two of us, after a long day, and she said, "Mum, I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I thought about it. I thought about all the ways I could answer." "You're here now," I said. She nodded. She looked at her tea. "Next time," I said, "don't wait 4 years." She looked up, and she smiled. "The real one, the one that costs nothing, the one I've been waiting to see again for longer than I'd let myself know. That was enough. That was more than enough. I've been thinking about what it actually takes for something like this to happen to a person, not in a blaming way. I spent too many years in a hospital to waste time on blame when there's still work to be done. But I'd been thinking about it honestly, the way you think about things at 63, when you've seen enough of life to stop flinching at the hard parts. Nolan didn't walk into my daughter's life and take everything in a single day. That's not how it works. It was slow. It was patient. It was 100 small moments where Lena told herself it was reasonable, it was practical, it was just the way things were done. And I think that's the thing that keeps me up sometimes, not what he did, but how carefully it was designed to feel normal. That's not bad luck. That's a choice someone made over and over to treat another person as a resource rather than a human being. And choices like that carry weight. They accumulate, They don't disappear just because no one's written them down yet. The reason it unravelled is the same reason it was built, through choices. Ms. Park finding the redirect form with the wrong signature, the clinic schedule that placed Lena at work on the day the power of attorney was supposedly signed, a branch manager who took his job seriously enough to pull the right records. None of that was luck either. That was people doing the right thing when it mattered. What I've learned, or maybe what I've remembered, because I think I knew it long before this, is that integrity isn't something you have in the big moments. It's something you practice in the small ones, so that when the big moment comes, you already know what you're going to do. Lena kept her clinic schedules going back 18 months. She kept them because she was careful and thorough, because those were her values long before she needed them to save her. That carefulness, that quiet diligence, that turned out to be what protected her in the end. Not a lawyer, not me. Her own record of showing up and doing things properly. And Lena herself. I want to say something about her because it would be easy to look at this story and see only what was done to her. But she is also someone who, when the moment came, told the truth. To me, to Ms. Park, to the bank, she sat in that office and she said what happened, clearly, without softening it to protect anyone. That took more courage than most people will ever have to find. It would have been easier to go home, to keep the peace, to tell herself another year wouldn't matter. She didn't. That's not nothing. That's everything. I don't think we talk enough about what it costs a person to finally say enough. There's a kind of strength that isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. Doesn't look like anything from the outside. It's just the decision made quietly to stop accepting less than what is true and right. Lena made that decision at a food court table in the Rideau Centre on a Tuesday afternoon in October. With coins in her hand and fear in her eyes, she made it anyway. I'm not sure I've ever been prouder of her. And I've been proud of her for 34 years.